Greetings everyone. Welcome to the first video of the PDF Decoded series. So today we'll be starting pacifism and we'll be starting with the first video in the series on pacifism, a study on peace. So before we proceed any further, I'll introduce myself. I'm Omkar Patnaik, founder and president of the Global Federal League. So as I mentioned before, we'll be studying peace today, the idea of peace. Now a valid question would be, why study peace? Most people, they know what peace is, they understand what peace is, so what's the need to study peace and what's there to study in peace? So my dear viewers, we all claim to know the meaning of peace, but in reality very few of us, we are in a position to define peace, because we take the help of words such as war, aggression and violence to define peace, but peace cannot be defined individually or independently by most of us. The second thing, peace has thousands of definitions and interpretations. There are different approaches to peace. It's not just that there's a universal definition for peace and like all of us, we can remember that and that will be doing the job. In fact, there's a separate branch of study called peace studies, which focuses on the various ideas on peace and various approaches on peace. And that's perhaps the very basic reason why we have subjects like Gandhian studies and Tolstoyan philosophy and so on. So peace is something which is which we consider a buzzword because people misunderstand and misuse it, and there's a need to convey the essence of peace, convey the diversity of ideas surrounding peace in a simplistic yet comprehensive format. This is what we're going to do in this video. Before we proceed any further, I would request all of you to set aside your preconceived notions, approach the subject with an open mind. Please don't just believe whatever I'm saying or whatever is being displayed on your screen. We'll be having a lot of definitions and quotes in the beginning, which will be very contradictory to each other. That's the beauty of studying peace or any other concept of the same kind. So think critically, go through the arguments in the favor of each theory, in the favor of each explanation, each narrative. And I believe by the end of this video, all of you would be in a position to come up with your own definition, your own theory, your own informed interpretation on peace. Now, there's a difference between a random interpretation and informed interpretation. Random interpretation is something which many of us are most likely to have now. We basically come across a few unorganized, scattered facts and we form an opinion. An informed interpretation is arrived upon through critical analysis, through critical study, through critical thought, and an informed interpretation is more likely to be accepted by your fellow beings, by those around you, in comparison to a random thought or a random, let's say, interpretation. So let's proceed. Okay. So the first step towards analyzing a subject is to have a look at popular definitions and quotes by popular philosophers, by people of knowledge in that field, people who have certain ideas on that field. So yeah, basically we have compiled a few popular quotes and sayings about peace, a few definitions. We'll begin with Wikipedia. Peace is a concept of societal friendship and harmony in the absence of hostility and violence. In a social sense, peace is commonly used to mean a lack of conflict, such as war and freedom from fear of violence between individuals or groups. Okay, now please have a look at this definition. A few terms have been mentioned: societal friendship, harmony, absence of hostility and violence. This definition can be divided into two parts. This is the first sentence. Okay, and then we have the second one. In a social sense, peace is commonly used to mean a lack of conflict, such as war, and freedom from fear of violence between individuals or groups. The first part of the definition, it focuses on the harmony narrative of peace. So it's not just limited to, let's say, a lack of conflict, lack of physically perceivable violence, because war, it's something which we can physically perceive. We can see it around us. We can have a look at the destruction and damage. We can have the quantified damage done by war in terms of the number of lives lost, in terms of the number of people impaired or maimed, and then we have loss of property and so on. So we can quantify war, but hostile sentiments, they cannot be quantified. If you have malign intentions towards a particular community or a particular nation, they cannot be calculated on a scalar parameter. Hence, there's a difference between both the parts of the definition. Wikipedia has done a great job of compiling both. This basically covers most of the interpretations of peace that we're going to come across. There's a principled or moral approach, and then there's a pragmatic or prudential approach. Now, let's have a look at a few quotes. We'll be going through, and we can actually classify the quotes into a few categories. So let's go till the end, and then we can discuss on what are the classifications we can come across. Firstly, we have Nelson Mandela. Peace is not just the absence of conflict. Peace is the creation of an environment where all can flourish, regardless of their race, color, creed, religion, gender, any other social markers of difference. This tilts towards the harmony definition because he has talked about peace, he has talked about conflict. By conflict, of course, he means war and other forms of physically perceivable violence and aggression. He says that that's not just like absence of that. That's not just what peace constitutes. Peace is the creation of an environment, so like where all can flourish regardless of their race, color, and other social markers. This is basically a harmonious social order, a just and tranquil social order, and hence this definition, it leans towards the harmony narrative of peace. Next, we have Mahatma Gandhi, who very poetically says, "The day the power of love overrules the love of power, the world will know peace." Again, the love of power. When is it seen? During wars, during genocides, during pogroms, when a particular community overpowers another one through physically perceivable violence. So we can see things happening, we can quantify them. They're scalar in nature. The power of love. The power of love is abstract in nature. So that's something which people can feel, but it cannot be physically perceived. Hence, again, we get back to the harmony narrative. Then we have Albert Einstein, who says peace cannot be kept by force, it can only be achieved by understanding. Again, we get back to the harmony narrative. So the three definitions that we saw, that we came across as of now, they're all inclining towards the harmony narrative of peace. There's another similarity. All three of them, they denigrate war. They condemn war. War and force and aggression, they are being condemned as undesirable and antithetical to peace. The fifth quote is something different to what we have seen until now. If you want peace, be prepared for war. This comes from the Greek philosopher Vegetius, and it's already a very popular topic of debate. So over here, war is being defined as an important prerequisite of peace. War is not necessarily being glorified or romanticized, but war is being defined as something inevitable, and you cannot define peace without war. That's what we get from here. We move on to a radically different opinion on peace from the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. Here shall be those whose eyes ever seek for an enemy. Here shall love peace as a means to new wars. Please do pay attention to his words. Here shall love peace as a means to new wars. So wars are being literally glorified over here. And the short peace more than the long. You I advise not to work, but to victory. Again, the degree of glorification is getting enhanced with the words. Let your work be a fight, let your peace be a victory. So over here, until now, the type of quotes that we came across, we can divide them into two categories. One, which overwhelmingly propounded peace as a harmonious social order, and which ruthlessly condemned violence and war. Then we had the quote by Vegetius, where war is being described as inevitable and if people are aspirants of peace, they must consider taking up arms to achieve the same. So war is a way of achieving peace. That's what we could see. It's not highly desirable, but again, it's something which circumstances compel people to undertake. That's what Vegetius believed. Now we have Friedrich Nietzsche, who glorifies war and considers war as a paramount element of peace. So basically defines war through a favorable approach to, he defines peace through a favorable approach to war. So this is something very unique and as expected highly debatable. Then we have Mahatma Gandhi again. I object to violence because when it appears to do good, the good is only temporary. The evil it does is permanent. Then we have Martin Luther King Jr. This is a high degree of harmony oriented approach which we can see over here. If we are to have peace on earth, our loyalties must transcend our race, our tribe, our class, and our nation. And this means we must develop a world perspective. This takes the harmony narrative to a next level. It talks about global solidarity, global sympathy. So a high level of harmony is being expected over here. If we have a look at the previous quotes, they talk about an amalgamation of an absence of conflict, violence, and a situation where everybody can flourish. So they don't get very deep into the harmony narrative. Almost all of these, actually all of these quotes, second, third, and fourth, they have mentioned both war and harmony. But over here, Martin Luther King Jr., he has focused on the harmony aspect more. He has emphasized on harmony. This is a new characteristic which we see. Now, next we have again Martin Luther King Jr. Peace is not a distant goal that we seek, but a means by which we arrive at the goal. Now, this is jumbling. This is confusing, I agree. So, this is again another way of looking at peace. Like, what should we consider peace as? What classifications would peace fall into? It's an abstract noun, fine. Grammatically, we can assign it as an abstract noun, but how should we define it exactly? Define the scope of peace. Things like that they get questioned, and that's something which is very interesting. That's something which is a very compelling topic of analysis and research. And I request all the viewers to undertake that research on their own initiative. A way they feel more attached to the topic, more attached to the subject. That's through individual research. And this is a very interesting topic. Like, how do you exactly define the scope of peace? And it's not a distant goal that we seek, but a means by which we arrive at the goal. So peace is defined as a means to achieve peace again. So this is jumbling, right? We need to decode this code which Martin Luther King has put forward. And after I have over-explained this quote, let me move forward to what Vijayalakshmi Pandit had to say. The more we sweat in peace, the less we bleed in war. Very candid, yet poetic. This comes from the first woman General Secretary of the United Nations General Assembly. She was also the sister to the first Indian Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru. Next, we have Barack Obama. This quote will be somehow similar to the quote we associate with Vegetius. We can understand that there will be war. So war is inevitable. Mr. Obama agrees to that and still strive for peace. So there's an inclination towards peace, but war is inevitable. That's being acknowledged. We can do that, for that is the history of human progress. That is the hope for all the world. And at this moment of challenge, that must be our work here on earth. So a sort of balance is being talked about over here. There will be people who are warmongers who will be waging wars, and we need people who will strive for peace in order to maintain the balance of the planet. Lastly, but not least, we have Plato. Only the dead have seen the end of war. So the word peace, it does not get even used over here. It does not get mentioned, but it has very well defined what an antonym to peace would be. Death is being talked about. From death, we get an enhanced sense of negativity, and only the dead have seen the end of war. So most of us, we consider war as an antonym to peace. So That's another way of understanding the subject. We understand what the antonym is, and then we ourselves come up with a definition for what the term we are considering. Again, war is being denigrated. So all the quotes that we came across that either supported war or acknowledged war, and the other quotes, they have ranged from acknowledging war as an evil to completely denigrating war and talking about social harmony. This is the range of diversity which we have seen. There are many other quotes. You can get a lot more quotes on the social media. You can get them on the internet, come across them on various platforms, various books and articles. But we have basically tried to cover the most popular ones or the most fascinating ones. So now I believe we are adequately informed to have a look at the key takeaways. Now, before we proceed, the intention of this series, it's not to provide you with another voluminous textbook definition, because there are adequate definitions already in the print and on the internet. Our intention over here is to compel you to think and analyze the idea and come up with your own definitions, with your own interpretations of this concept. That's what is the very essence of PDF Decoded. So peace is a buzzword, as I mentioned, and very often misunderstood and misrepresented. Most of us, if we are given a grammar exercise, like write down the antonym of peace, we'll be putting forward war. Some of us will be putting forward terms like chaos and anarchy. But again, we'll be having a fair share of people who disagree with that. Now, if we consider the opinion of all the peace theorists and all, not everybody agrees that war is an opposition to peace. Some people believe in the just war tradition, where war is an integral and essential part of maintaining peace. So peace depends on how you consider it. For example, a situation of utter chaos and cacophony, that might be a sort of peace for someone, while other people, they find it to be highly disturbing and disruptive. We basically can have a look at a key essential elements, at a few key essential elements of peace. We have to consider the arguments from all the proponents, the and all the theories. There must be some base behind them, right? So we'll be analyzing that, and only then we'll be deciding it ourselves in our personal opinion whether a particular theory, a particular approach to peace, whether it's valid, whether it's practical, whether it's flawed or not. Peace has a lot of interpretations, just as I elaborated now, and all peace proponents agree that harmony and absence of discontent and aggression are the integral components of the idea. So, discontent, aggression, and harmony. People might support war, the just war tradition, that's perfectly fine. But aggression is something which most proponents, or like unanimously, peace proponents, they don't support aggression. That you go around yourself and you impose your dominance over someone and like instigate people to take up arms. That's something which no peace proponent will approve of. Discontent, again, we don't want people to feel discontent, so that's something which all peace proponents agree to. And harmony, now harmony is desirable. Not every peace proponent talks about harmony, but nobody denies the fact that harmony is desirable. If you have a look at the key quotes that we saw over there, even those quotes which supported war, they didn't say that harmony is undesirable and people should keep on fighting amongst themselves. So harmony is essential, but they support war also to a large extent. Peace can be achieved only when all divisions in the society are transcended and all the vices are overcome. So this is, again, nobody defies this statement. Most people agree to this, if not proactively, but at least people send their quiet approval. A few like Martin Luther King Jr. and Nelson Mandela, they speak vocally in support of this idea. So this is what peace is in a nutshell. But of course, we don't claim that this is the entire essence of peace. There's a lot to know more. And we have tried to summarize things, because if we just talk about the definition of peace and we go on defining its scope and like scaling its horizons, then it will be very long and incomprehensible. So we are summarizing things and trying to maintain the essence, but there are a few suggested readings. We'll be providing a few resources for your perusal. So we would request you to go through the same and expand your horizons of knowledge. We come to the theories of peace. So as it has been repeatedly reiterated in the video, there are thousands of definitions of peace. Every person has his own perspective on peace, and we over here, we are basically going to talk about a few popular ones, a few widely accepted ones in the academic circles. So you can have a look at the photographs of the various philosophers and peace activists which we have known. So we are going to discuss each of their opinions, what they had to say about peace. We will be classifying their opinions into certain divisions. So let's start with peace resulting from slavery or submission. Okay, let me read the paragraph first. Going by the widely believed definition of peace, operation is a state of peace. Please pay attention to this particular part. Operation is a state of peace if the oppressed entity does not reciprocate and endures the atrocities committed. It has been claimed since ages that absolute rule and submission produce a sort of peace. Now, people are bound to have ambivalent feelings after reading these words, and there would be people who would be having very absolute feelings. Some people would be completely detesting the idea. There would be others who think, okay, to some extent the idea is correct. The people with ambivalent feelings, they'll see, okay, we have, let's say, we accept things to a large extent, we accept atrocities to a large extent, and only when it turns unbearable, we protest. There's another school of thought which will believe that, okay, absolutist rule has to be ensured. The ruler is divine. The ruler enjoys the sanction of a legal entity. Now, that legal entity can either be God, as we see in the divine theory, or as we see in the totalitarian approach to the state, it can be through an unquestioned mandate of the people. Anyways, those people, they'll be supporting the totalitarian approach to peace. Don't protest, endure everything. That's how you'll achieve peace. But of course, very evidently, this sort of peace has undoubtedly gathered a lot of critics. It's unjust in nature. It brews storm of resentment and distress. Now, my personal opinion, resentment and distress. Resentment and distress have been the root causes of any revolution, whether be it violent, non-violent. These two things have been present. That's the reason we have had revolutions in the first place. So people, they were not really in a mood to carry out protests and gather on the roads and cause arson and damage, vandalism, damage public property and kill people. They did not want to do that. People were happy with their own lives, but at some point or the other, the sovereign rulers, the sovereigns, the appointed people, they crossed the line. They violated people's liberty or their rights and subjected them to certain atrocities, and that's the only reason we had revolutions. It has been repeatedly demonstrated that totalitarianism has mostly ended in results which don't qualify any parameters of peace. To talk about French Revolution, we had a revolution then, it ended with the execution of the king and the queen and a lot of bloodshed. A rule of terror was seen. Then again, the same cycle repeated. France had dictators coming in. Then France again returned to a constitutional monarchy. Then again, a republic came to power. So things did not end very nicely. And the key reason behind that is a totalitarian regime, which was indifferent to the needs of the people. Far from maintaining stability, autocratic regimes increase the possibility of a violent reciprocity and enhance the idea of a just war. Now, see, warmongers, they're always in the lookout for a reason to cause a war. So people, until and unless they are convinced that there has to be war, there has to be certain sort of aggression against the current ruling government or ruling entity, they won't step down on the streets or they won't pick up the arms. So if the government gives them a solid reason to do that, warmongers, they can easily manipulate the people, they can easily radicalize the people and convince them to take up arms and take up violent means. The entire narrative around terrorism, why is terrorism getting such a big boost? It's not because of their financial resources and donations which they receive. It's not because that certain countries are supporting terror activities. It's because the countries which are afflicted by terrorist activities, somewhere or the other, people from certain communities or people from certain walks of life, they suffer some sort of injustice over there. And that's the reason they feel convinced to take up arms and fight for a cause. So while they believe that they are giving up their lives, they're being martyred, they don't understand that they're being used as pawns in the global diplomatic war, in a chess of terrorism and let's say some governmental institution. So there's a chessboard, they are being used as pawns and they're being misutilized. This is what autocratic institutions have resulted in most of the times. Rousseau maligned this sort of peace by calling it the peace of Ulysses and his comrades, imprisoned in the cave of Cyclops and waiting their turn to be devoured. Most pacifists evidently dissociate themselves from the peace of slavery. Rather, for majority of them, peace is not simply acquiescing to evil passively. Pacifism is not passivism. Please pay attention to these two words. Pacifism involves actively but non-violently resisting evil. So there are non-violent ways of countering atrocities. There are ways of protesting which are not necessarily violent, and they can be undertook. This is what many pacifists believe. Nonetheless, we have some pacifists such as Tolstoy who do advocate non-resistance. Then we have the Christian tradition which says, do not resist one who is evil and love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Satyagraha, form of pacifism propounded by Mahatma Gandhi, seeks to appeal to the conscience of the perpetrator and compel them to end their atrocities. So, to talk about Satyagraha, we had a lot of movements, primarily in South Africa and in India, where to fight for their rights, people they took to the streets. There were lathi charges, that is, people were beaten by the police, guns were fired, stones were hurled, but from the side of the demonstrators, nobody undertook any action, not even in self-defense. So people literally they presented themselves before the perpetrators to commit atrocities, to get beaten, and many people lost their lives like that. But this caused a big tremor in the international press, and this resulted in the denigration of the colonial powers, the colonial government. Now, coming to peace as modus vivendi, truce or balance of power. This refers to a situation where a stagnation of armed conflict is observed due to absence of opportunity for actualization of a war. While the crisis gets temporarily resolved, hostile sentiments still exist and an escalation can be highly expected in the future. So there are certain situations when either of the belligerents is not in a position to continue. For example, let's assume that all the weapon factories they get destroyed miraculously. Then they cannot pursue war further because what will they fight with? Their hands. So this is one possibility. Unfortunately, this does not happen. There are other situations which are much more challenging. Let's say a drought takes place in both the belligerent countries, or there's some other problem, some global economic recession, or maybe some epidemic, some pandemic taking place. In that case, countries cannot afford to fight wars, and a temporary truce is arrived upon. But the hostile sentiments they still exist, and sometime or the other, the war will get escalated, the crisis will get escalated, and the things won't get resolved. This is what critics of this theory have to say. But there are others who believe in the classical realist position that in order to maintain order between states, peace between states, uh, a sort of balance of power has to be maintained, as it's being talked about in this paragraph. So they have to arrive upon a situation where no country is in a position to attack the other, due to some other reasons. And this would require a willingness to get into war in order to decrease the influence of a country which is aggressively expanding its influence. Let's assume there's a country A which is rapidly annexing other territories. We have to come up with a way to stop that, and we therefore declare a war on country A to contain its expansion. This has of course been denigrated by various other theorists of peace who believe that this promotes the just war tradition. War with a just reason. This is what people say. Opponents of this sort of theory, they say that the reason is justified and hence war should not be denigrated. War should not be condemned. It should be supported. So proponents of this theory, they have included Duke Metternich, who hosted the Vienna Congress in 1815 in the aftermath of the Battle of Waterloo. So over there, Prussia, Russia, Austria, and Britain, they divided the territories conquered by France in Europe amongst themselves, and they took a few steps to contain the future expansion of the French Empire. Then we have Otto von Bismarck, who was the father of Germany, of the German Empire. He was the Iron Man of Germany. Then we have Hans Morgenthau and Henry Kissinger. So all these people, they believe that balance of power is an essential prerequisite to maintain peace. Now, this form of peace, as mentioned before, has been disapproved by most pacifists, including the prominent German philosopher Immanuel Kant. Kant rejected the idea by stating that peace means an absolute end to all hostilities. So, perpetual peace, if that's not achieved, then it's not peace, it's a secret reservation of the material for future war. Those who call themselves pacifists usually agree with Kant, and a mere modus vivendi produced by impotence or exhaustion will not actually signify peace, since hostile intent remains. And pacifists will argue that the peace of deterrence and detent are not really peace either, because they are the result of an increase in armaments and the threat of escalating violence. The Cold War would be a good example, because we had a few eventful things happening, but nothing really of that global stature after, as we had the World War II, nothing really of that scale or magnitude happened. So Cold War would be a good example where the apprehension prevails, the fear prevails, but nothing really substantial happens. So this was a situation where we saw a temporary truce or modus vivendi. And of course, balance of power was something which countries were striving for, because USA was in a bid to counter USSR's expansion in Eastern Europe. It started its own Marshall Plan in Western Europe. Both the sides had their own arguments. They blamed each other for expansionism. And this is how we arrived at the Cold War. And to be frank, in my opinion, this balance of power, it's an illusion, because nobody can really achieve it like that. It requires a lot of international consensus, and no country is going to willingly give up its own share of power. So there's a lot of distrust and what is a lack of coordination in that regard with the international forums. Next, we have peace as a just and tranquil order. Now, this form of peace can be defined as stability resulting from acceptance and consensus. Satisfaction is an important element of this sort of peace. So it is not something which is forced upon the people. If people are satisfied, then they won't revolt, they won't protest, they won't resort to any radical activities, and that's how peace can be achieved. This is what proponents of this idea believe. Immanuel Kant, a very popular proponent of this idea, believed that associates the emergence of this form of peace with the rise of liberal democracy and the end of autocratic regimes. So, a sort of government where citizens are entitled to a wide variety of rights. The citizens are free to take their own decisions, and they're not interfered with in their personal spheres. Over there, they won't necessarily have a reason to revolt against the government or against any entity as such. So peace can be achieved. Now, there's another interpretation of the just and tranquil order too. Proponents of just war, they seek to associate this with the modus vivendi one. So we have people who say that in order to arrive upon a just and tranquil order, wars have to be fought, a balance of power has to be maintained, and a certain purportedly evil, or let's say belligerent entity has to be stalled, has to be stopped from expanding through violent means. So most pacifists, again, they don't agree with this just war tradition, and that is what separates pacifists from the rest of the peacemakers or peace builders or peace oriented people, because you'll find people associating themselves with peacekeeping, but they won't associate themselves with pacifism. This is the reason. This is the key reason why this is happening. Now we come to the capitalist interpretation of peace: free trade, interdependence, and globalization. Central tenets of classical liberalism, capitalism, and English liberal thinkers of the late 19th and early 20th century, they promoted free trade. Now, Cambridge economist John Maynard Keynes is a very popular economist. He said that he was brought up on this idea and held it unquestioned until at least the early 19th, until the 1920s. During economic globalization in the decades leading up to World War One, writers such as Norman Angell argued that the growth of economic interdependence between the great powers made war between them futile and highly unlikely. But let's have a look at the contradiction. He made this argument in 1913. A year later, Europe's economically interconnected states were embroiled in what would later become known as the First World War. So, Europe was a classic failure of this theory, of this interpretation of peace. Nevertheless, this is not just a story about failure, there's a successful side also. We have the European Union. So, the very continent which got embroiled in the war, later on that went on to become the most successful example of the success of this theory, the European Union. So after World War II, the countries, they realized that they could no longer carry out this fight because all of them, they would get destroyed in the war. So if they could evolve into a close economic community with economic interests vested in each other, they can ensure that the future governments, they don't get engaged in wars, and they find wars as a very impractical way of dealing disputes. So that did happen. They formed the European Economic Community, which later on evolved into the European Union uh, in 1993 at Maastricht. So this is a successful example of this theory. These ideas have again come to prominence among liberal internationalists during the globalization of the late 20th and early 21st centuries. These ideas have seen capitalism as consistent with and even conducive to peace. So yeah, that's how like we are witnessing arenas of this idea. Globalization is now being like welcomed in by people, and people are now more open to globalization. This has created a sort of a global solidarity, which we'll be later studying on. We'll be studying it later on in the course of the video. What is a global solidarity? So globalization, to some extent, it has created that. It's not just economically significant activities. We have culture traveling across countries. We have food and music traveling across the countries. So yeah, that's something which people say and which has undoubtedly caused a lot of peace in earlier turbulent areas. But again, this has come up with its own implications, and this is what the implications are, what we're going to study in the next theory, the socialist approach to peace. So if socialist, communist, and left-wing liberal writers of 19th and 20th centuries, Lenin, J. A. Hobson, John Strachey, are some examples. They argued that capitalism caused war. Now, how did that happen? Through promoting imperial or other economic rivalries that lead to international conflict. Now, we have organizations such as the World Trade Organization, we have the World Bank, we have the International Monetary Fund, and so on, which don't deal with all countries in an equal manner. We have P5 nations in the United Nations Security Council, which are more powerful than the other countries, other member nations. Also, we have a lot of tariff barriers and things like that, which really sour the relations between countries. So sometimes globalization becomes a one-sided phenomenon. Certain countries, they reap the benefits, while others, they undergo losses. So over here, a sort of socialist internationalism has been propounded. John Maynard Keynes, in response to such writers who argued that capitalism caused war. He argued that managed capitalism could promote peace. So there are two approaches. Either we leave it laissez-faire, or we have a managed capitalism approach. So John Maynard Keynes, he argued that managed capitalism would promote peace. This involved international coordination of fiscal and monetary policies in international monetary system that did not pit the interests of countries against each other. So centralizing the entire process, ensuring an equal distribution of rights to all the entities, ensuring equal degree of freedom of trade for all, and equal legislations for everyone. So no country is subject to unfair rules and regulations. These ideas underlay the creation of International Monetary Fund. So Keynes did this work during World War II, and this later on led to the creation of the International Monetary Fund. And then we had the World Bank at Bretton Woods in 1944. And later of the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, which evolved into the World Trade Organization. So though in a way, these organizations, they have come out of Keynes's work, but there's a lot of crony capitalism which is being played out, a lot of big stick and dollar diplomacy which is being seen in these organizations, and this is what the socialist theorists of peace, they criticize. Come to peace war game. This is an interesting part. Peace war game is an iterated game originally played in academic groups and by computer simulation for years to study possible strategies of cooperation and aggression. So if you would have played certain video games, certain action games, you must have seen that the player who's most aggressive, by some or the other way, that person endures a lot of damage. The game becomes more challenging for that person, while those who play calmly and steadily throughout the game, they somehow are able to survive. This is what international relation theorists, they use to explain the peace war game theory. Peacemakers, they become richer and richer over the time, and it becomes clear that war waging has greater costs than initially anticipated. So if they get embroiled in wars, they are going to lose a lot of their resources. Hence, they seek to resolve their disputes through other diplomatic means. But again, this a constant aggressor. There's a strategy which that acquired wealth more rapidly was Genghis Khan. So they have got this strategy. They have named it Genghis Khan after the popular Mongol emperor, and this refers to a constant aggressor making war continually to gain resources. Now, if the passive countries or the passive entities, they join hands together against this constant aggressor, they can contain the expansionism, they can contain the hostility of this particular entity, and in turn end war and ensure peace. So this led to the development of the provocable nice guy strategy. So this, again, we find this just war tradition being invoked. A peacemaker until attacked. So that person won't really cause any disturbance until and unless peace is hampered. Multiple players continue to gain wealth cooperating with each other while bleeding the constant aggressor. The Hanseatic League for Trade and Mutual Defense appears to have originated from such concerns about seaborne raiders. Another good example would be Quad Summit, which was established to counter Chinese expansion, as I mentioned before. We have international organization and law. One of the most influential theories of peace, especially since Woodrow Wilson led the creation of the League of Nations at the Paris Peace Conference of 1990, is that peace will be advanced if the international anarchy of states, the intentional and international anarchy of states, is replaced through the growth of international law, promoted and enforced through international organizations such as the League of Nations, the United Nations, and other functional international organizations. So basically, during those days, we didn't have an international law, no international standards and conventions which would administrate matters which are internationally relevant. So, for example, extradition, the way in which it is being handled now, Extradition, of course, it's a very controversial topic. We have a lot of like problems with that too in the present times, but in the earlier days, it was a furthermore complicated matter. So since these safeguards, these laws and conventions weren't there, things were very anarchic. Hence, in order to bring about a sort of order, international organizational law was propounded as a way of achieving peace. This is how the United Nations, the League of Nations, and the other functional international organizations being formed. One of the early and most important exponents of this view was Alfred Eckhart Zimmern. For example, in his 1936 book, The League of Nations and the Rule of Law. Then we have transnational solidarity. Okay. This is something which we talked about in the globalization part. Globalization causes a transnational or an international solidarity. People develop empathetic feelings towards each other. They're concerned about each other, and hostile sentiments, they get dissipated. Many idealist thinkers about international relations, for example, in the traditions of Immanuel Kant and Karl Marx, have argued that the key to peace is the growth of some form of solidarity between peoples or classes of people, spanning the lines of cleavage between nations or states that lead to war. So, net net, if people themselves are unwilling to participate in war, if people themselves they're not hostile towards each other, then war is not possible. This is the approach to transnational solidarity. One version of this idea is the idea of promoting international understanding between nations through international mobility of students. An idea most powerfully advanced by Cecil Rhodes in the creation of Rhodes scholarships and his successors such as J. William Fulbright. The students, they are the most enthusiastic component of our society, student and youth. So if through them we can propagate peace and empathy, most of the people they would shun the idea of hostility. They would develop empathetic feelings towards each other. They would understand other communities better, and this would in turn lead to a society where people won't support warmongers. So, now coming to positive peace, this is considered to be the most comprehensive definition of peace, the harmony narrative of peace that we have come across. So this is basically an extension of that. It goes beyond quintessential understanding of the idea and emphasizes on an overall wholeness of a society as a parameter of determining peace. So equality, prosperity, harmony can be referred to as integral elements of positive peace. Then the peace of a just and tranquil order. It points towards something like a condition of wholeness, in which there is solidarity, mutual respect, and satisfaction of needs. In this vision of peace, there is genuine community and human flourishing. So this goes beyond the just and tranquil order. There's prosperity, there's like people flourish, and like there's no possible reason for having a war or any other sort of aggression. That is what is considered as positive peace. It can be best understood from the tradition of virtue ethics, where peacefulness is understood as a virtue that is connected to other virtues such as modesty, tolerance, and mercy. It is important to note that peace is not mere quietism and passivity of meditation or contemplation. So J. McDaniel, 2005, has argued in favor of a notion of creative peace in which there is tension and activity as individuals and cultures must learn to listen to and interact with one another. This is where positive peace is really comprehensive. There are different ideas on peace, and here are a few popular ones. There are actually a lot more interpretations. So now we come to Lyotard postmodernism. Some peace thinkers have abandoned any single and all-encompassing definition of peace. Rather, they promote the idea of many pieces. They argue that no singular correct definition of peace can exist. Peace should be perceived as a plurality. Okay, so this is something which all of us, I believe, we can relate to, because there's no single definition or single theory of peace to which we relate to. There are multiple, and maybe there's not a single theory which we relate to. That's also possible. But most of us, we must have agreed to multiple theories, 2 or 3 theories we must have agreed to. So this is what Lyotard postmodernism talks about. You come up with your own combination of ideas, you come up with your own combination of interpretations to form your own idea on peace, come up with your own definition on peace. So this postmodern understanding of peace was based on the philosophy of Jean-Francois Lyotard. It served as a fundament for the more recent concept of transnational pieces and elicitive conflict transformation. So this is what all the theories of peace have been. We have not covered all of them because there are many other interpretations, there are many other thoughts. If we get into international relations, if we get into peace studies, Gandhian studies in depth, we'll come across a lot of other philosophies. In fact, Gandhian studies, Tolstoyan studies, then we have Immanuel Kant and Martin Luther King Jr., all of them, though in some cases we have put them under the same categories of peace theory, they have their different views and they're very distinct. So that would be a very comprehensive and academic pursuit. We would appreciate if our viewers could undertake that. So over here, with Lyotard postmodernism, we come to the end of our presentation. There are a lot more ideas around peace. In fact, Gandhi, Tolstoy, and Martin Luther King Jr., Immanuel Kant, all of them, they have their separate thoughts on peace. So all of them, they can be individually studied and like the details, they are compiled into various schools of philosophy. So there are a variety of resources which you can refer to in order to know more. There's the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. So most of our content, it has been pulled out from there. Then we have Wikipedia. Of course, we have gone through the citations. That's something which we need to do while studying anything from Wikipedia because it's a public domain. So people can edit information. So substantiate whatever you see over there with other social pages, other internet pages, other websites and books. Then you have the grade 11 political science textbook, where there's a separate chapter dedicated to peace. So these are a few resources. There are actually a lot more, and I encourage viewers to look beyond. If there's something more you have found out, maybe if there's a factual inaccuracy, if there's a factual inaccuracy in our video, if there's something we have missed out, please do let us know. We would like to work on that in the future videos. We'll try to explain those terms, and please do write down your definition of peace, your understanding, whatever you have understood from today's video in the comment section, so that it would help us in analyzing the quality of work which we have done. Thank you very much for watching the video till the end. Stay safe, stay positive, test negative, and stay tuned to our YouTube channel and our social media pages for further updates.